My mother-in-law poured something strange into my drink when she thought I wasn't looking. She smiled wide, almost too wide, and declared, "Special cocktail for my favorite son-in-law." Her cheeriness felt thin, stretched tight over something she didn't want me to see. I thanked her, making sure not to let on that I'd noticed, then quietly swapped glasses with her husband, Gerald, the man who never wasted an opportunity to belittle my work or remind me of my supposed shortcomings. 45 minutes after that switch, the night took a turn that felt almost surreal, like reality itself was unraveling at the seams. Let me back up. I'm Julian Mercer, 32. I make my living as a photographer in Asheville, North Carolina. Not the Instagram kind. Real assignments, real deadlines, real stakes. Weddings, wildlife, magazine spreads, travel gigs, the occasional ad campaign. I built my business from the ground up, hustling for every client, every dollar. I've shot everything from Appalachian sunrise vistas to the raw, frosted wilderness of Montana. It's not glamorous, but I love it. I'm good at it. It puts food on our table and keeps the roof over our heads. But to my in-laws, especially Diane, my mother-in-law, my work was never quite enough. It was as though my entire life was a waiting room for something more respectable, more predictable, more like them. At every family dinner, Gerald, my father-in-law, would lean back in his chair, swirling his wine, and ask, "How's the little photography hobby?" Always with that patronizing smirk. He was an investment banker and lived for numbers, portfolios, and properties. He measured worth in square footage and mutual funds, not captured moments or creative vision. Sunday dinners fell into a rhythm. Diane doted on my wife, Haley, and her brother. Gerald grilled me about my latest jobs and what I was really earning, and Haley squeezed my hand under the table, her silent way of apologizing for her parents' sharp edges. This particular night, I was running on empty. I'd just come off a brutal week in Montana, wading through snowdrifts to photograph bison for National Geographic. A dream assignment, the kind of job that in my world meant you'd made it. But to Diane and Gerald, it was just another distraction from real life. Haley insisted we couldn't skip her mom's birthday dinner, even though I was exhausted. "Just a couple hours," she promised. I agreed, pushing aside the knot of unease in my stomach, ignoring the voice telling me that something felt off even before I'd stepped into their pristine, magazine-perfect house. Diane caught me in the kitchen, her gaze darting nervously as she pressed that glass into my hand. "I made it special just for you," she said, her fingers trembling slightly. The glass itself had a barely there sheen on the surface, something that caught in the overhead light. My instincts, home behind the lens for subtlety and detail, screamed at me to pay attention, but I didn't have any idea just how off things were about to get. I think, in some ways, I always knew I would never truly belong in their world. Haley and I fell in love at an art show 6 years ago. She was finishing her master's in environmental science, and I was displaying a collection of black and white landscapes. We clicked instantly. She understood my need to chase the world's beauty with my camera, and I admired her fierce dedication to protecting it. Our lives fit together like pieces of an unexpected puzzle. Her parents, though, never stopped trying to pry those pieces apart. From the start, Gerald made it clear he expected someone more substantial for his daughter. A man with a desk job, a pension, a plan. Diane was subtler, but her disapproval ran deep. She praised my photos, but always with a question about when I'd settle down into something secure. At every family gathering, she introduced me as the photographer, never using my name, never acknowledging me as part of their family. I tried to win them over. I brought expensive bottles of wine, shared stories of my travels, even showed them my work in major magazines. It didn't matter. To them, I was a phase, a risk their daughter would outgrow. Last Christmas, I overheard Diane on the phone with a friend. Haley could have married Thomas, orthopedic surgeon, family money. But she picked the creative one. She said creative like it was a disease. Gerald was even less diplomatic. When Haley and I told him we were trying for a baby, he pulled me into a study and said, "Children are expensive, son. Maybe you should get a real job before you bring one into the world." I never told Haley about any of this. She loved her parents, flaws and all, and I didn't want to make her choose between us. So I played the part, smiling, shaking hands, complimenting Diane's cooking, swallowing my pride and my anger. But looking back, the warnings were there. Diane would always find reason to pull Haley away if I started telling a story about a successful assignment. She'd forget to include me in family photos. Gerald once suggested therapy for Haley's impulsive decisions while staring straight at me. I ignored it all, hoping time would soften her edges. I was wrong. The day of Diane's birthday dinner, I drove straight from the airport, still smelling of snow and campfire, my camera bag heavy with memory cards and the thrill of a job well done. Those photos were worth a small fortune, enough to cover our mortgage for months. But to my in-laws, I might as well have been a kid bringing home finger paintings. I put on my best shirt, tried to scrub fatigue from my face, and drove with Haley to their sprawling house nestled in a neighborhood of manicured lawns and imported cars. Dinner was its usual performance. Gerald talked at length about his latest investment, barely noticing anyone else at the table. Diane fussed over every detail, making sure her china sparkled, her centerpiece was just so. Haley's brother and his wife kept the conversation light, as if afraid deeper topics might set off one of Gerald's lectures. I sat there, sipping my beer, counting the minutes, letting the familiar ache of not belonging settle in my chest. After dinner, Diane announced her famous sangria for dessert, vanishing into the kitchen with practiced grace. I offered to help, wanting a moment to breathe. That's when I saw it. 2 glasses set off to the side, not with the others. As I stepped in, Diane quickly poured something from a tiny vial into one of them. The liquid was clear, odorless, and she had the vial so fast, I almost wonder if I'd imagined it. But the film on the drink was real. "Oh, Julian, I've got this," she chirped, the forced brightness in her voice betraying her nerves. "This one's for you. Special recipe for my favorite son-in-law." My heart pounded. The drink shimmered oddly in the light, a slickness that didn't belong. "Let me help you carry these," I said, my voice steady. I picked up both glasses, determined not to let her see my hands shake. In the dining room, Gerald barely looked up from his phone as I set the drinks down. I watched his face as he took a sip from the glass that was meant for me, a flicker of confusion, then annoyance, then something else entirely. 45 minutes later, as the conversation at the table lulled and Gerald's words began to slur, I realized just how deep the rift with my in-laws truly ran. The night unraveled from there, secrets spilling into the open, changing everything I thought I knew about the family I tried so hard to join. "Sangria, sir?" My voice was steady as I set the glass in front of Gerald. Careful not to linger, careful not to let my own hand brush the rim. I smiled, the way I practiced, and poured myself water, swirling the ice cubes around as if I truly preferred it. Gerald barely glanced up before knocking back a long sip. I kept my eyes on the condensation forming on my tumbler as I watched him from the corner of my eye. The first few minutes passed in the usual haze of polite conversation and dessert orders, but beneath it all, I was on alert. My mother-in-law's eyes flickered over me, full of that brittle, practiced warmth, and I could practically feel the weight of her attention, as if she was waiting for something. 45 minutes later, Gerald's face turned the color of old linen, sweat beading on his temples as he pressed a napkin to his lips and muttered something about feeling unwell. He lurched up from the table, nearly knocking over his chair, and staggered toward the bathroom. The sound that followed, retching, groans, the sharp thud of something falling, echoed back to us with an ugliness that made the hairs stand up on my arms. Diane's fork clattered to her plate. I watched the color drain from her face as realization set in, and in that moment, her gaze met mine across the table. Her eyes, usually so guarded and critical, were wide with something almost like fear. That's when the truth hit me. My mother-in-law had tried to poison me, and she knew I had figured it out. I didn't react. I didn't flinch or accuse her, didn't even allow my expression to change. I let the moment pass, silent and electric, and spooned another bite of chocolate cake into my mouth while Haley rushed off to check on her dad. The room erupted into chaos, shouts, apologies, Diane fluttering her hands and blaming bad shellfish, Gerald cursing to the bathroom door that it was probably food poisoning. I sat quietly, eyes lowered, and when no one was looking, I slipped the untouched glass into my pocket, wrapping it carefully in a napkin. The anger I felt was something cold and precise, nothing like the hot, reckless fury I'd imagined. It was a kind of anger that plans, that waits, that refuses to be dismissed or silenced. I wasn't going to let this pass, but I also wasn't about to fight them on their terms. Let them see who they really were. Let them see themselves. The following Monday, I brought the glass to Jason, an old client who owed me a favor. He ran a toxicology lab out by the hospital, a gray building whose windows always seemed fogged over. He looked up from his computer as I walked in. Personal or professional? He asked, eyebrow raised, like he could already guess which. Family, I said, and left it at that. 3 days later, Jason called me back. Julian, there were benzos, like Xanax, in that drink. Not a fatal dose, but enough to put someone under for hours. Maybe mess with their memory. 2. Where did this come from? His tone was somewhere between curiosity and concern. I thanked him, told him I'd need a written report for my records, and ignored the question. Some truths are heavier than others. That night, I stood in the kitchen, watching Haley chop vegetables for dinner. I told her I wanted to skip Sunday dinners for a while, said I needed to focus on prepping for my upcoming exhibition. She looked up, eyes searching my face for some clue, but didn't push. If you're sure, she said, voice soft. I kept the truth to myself for now. There was more I needed to know, more I needed to understand before I could bring it all crashing down. So I started digging. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for. Diane had 3 active Xanax prescriptions from 3 different doctors, each written under slightly different versions of her name. The pharmacy records were a mess. Overlapping dates, escalating doses, red flags missed or ignored. I talked to neighbors, old acquaintances from the country club, and pieced together a pattern of erratic behavior. Diane showing up glassy-eyed to parties, slurred words, stories about misplaced jewelry that never turned up, whispers about her temper and her secrets. It was as if she'd been living a double life for years, one carefully curated for public consumption, the other unraveling in private. I gathered everything, documents, rumors, even a few texts she'd accidentally sent to Haley about handling me, and waited for my chance. It didn't take long. One evening, Haley mentioned that her mother wanted new photos for her social media. She actually asked for you, Haley said, her tone uncertain, as if she couldn't quite believe it herself. I agreed, knowing this was the opening I'd been waiting for. Saturday arrived gray and humid. I showed up at their house alone, camera bag in one hand, sealed envelope in the other. Diane greeted me at the door, dressed to the nines, makeup flawless, smile brittle. Gerald's at work, she said, voice tight. Before she could say anything else, I handed her the envelope. She opened it with trembling fingers, eyes flicking over the toxicology report, then the prescription records, then the printouts of pharmacy logs. Her hand shook so badly she nearly dropped them. This is ridiculous, she hissed, voice barely above a whisper. We both know what happened, I said, cutting her off. What I don't know is why. For a moment, I saw something old and wounded flicker in her eyes. Fear, maybe, or the memory of a time when she didn't have to fight so hard to keep control. But then her expression hardened into something cold and familiar. You're not good enough for my daughter. You never will be. A man provides security, not pictures and gallery shows. And drugging your daughter's husband is your idea of security? I kept my voice even, refusing to let her provoke me. It wasn't going to hurt you, she spat. Just make you sick. Make you miss that stupid gallery opening you keep talking about. Prove to Haley you're unreliable, that you don't belong in this family. She's too good for you. I let her words hang in the air, the silence between us growing heavy and sharp. Here's what happens next, I said. You tell Gerald what you did. Then you both start treating me with respect. Not because you've had some epiphany, but because the alternative is Haley finding out exactly who you are, prescriptions and all. Diane gave a brittle, humorless laugh. She'll never believe you over us. We're her family. All you have is this. She shook the envelope at me. I picked up my camera bag and met her gaze. Maybe not, but she'll believe the lab report. She'll believe the prescriptions. And she'll believe the neighbors you've lied to and stolen from. You want to risk losing your daughter over this. I left without taking a single photo, the weight of everything that had just happened settling in my chest like a stone. That night, Diane called Haley in tears, voice trembling, spinning a story about how I'd shown up angry, threatened her, acted inappropriately. Haley confronted me as soon as she hung up, confusion and pain written all over her face. I realized I couldn't hide behind half-truths anymore. I showed her the lab report, the paperwork, and finally, my phone, years of hostile texts from Diane, each one more vitriolic than the last. My mom wouldn't do this, Haley kept insisting, but her voice was thinner now, uncertain. She scrolled through the evidence again and again, as if searching for some detail that would exonerate her mother, searching for a way out of the truth. The next day, she went back to her parents' house alone. I waited at home, pacing the floor, imagining every possible outcome. When she returned hours later, her eyes were swollen and red, her face a mask of exhaustion and grief. "My dad says it's all a misunderstanding," she whispered. "He says you're just trying to break us apart because you're insecure, because you can't stand that they don't respect you." I nodded, unsurprised. "What do you think?" I asked, but she didn't answer. She just climbed into bed, turning her back to me, shoulders hunched and silent. I had stood up for myself. I had done what I thought was right, refusing to be a victim or a scapegoat. But in exposing Diane, I'd also exposed the cracks in Haley's world, the fault lines running through her family that she spent years papering over. Now, I was a villain in someone else's story, the outsider they blamed for the mess they created. Haley barely spoke to me for 2 weeks, the silence between us growing heavier with every passing day. I'd won in a way, but it didn't feel like victory. It felt like exile. And in the quiet, I wonder what price I'd really paid for the truth. She drove out to her parents' place on her own that Sunday. When she came back, her eyes were bloodshot and her expression was shuttered. A new wariness had crept in, a kind of suspicion I hadn't seen before. I tried not to ask questions. Instead, I drowned myself in my work, spending marathon hours in my studio, pretending that if I stayed busy enough, this whole thing would blow over. I'd always imagined that family drama would work itself out, that time and distance could heal most wounds. But in the weeks that followed, the air in our apartment thickened with silence and unspoken questions. Then, out of nowhere, a package landed on our doorstep. No return address, just my name scrawled on the top in handwriting I didn't recognize. Inside was a USB drive and a folded note. "You should see this. Vanessa, Owen's wife." I barely knew her, but her bluntness made my hands sweat as I picked up the drive. I had no idea what to expect, but something in me braced for impact. I plugged the drive into my laptop. It was loaded with home security footage, angles I recognized from Gerald and Diane's sprawling house. My heart hammered as I scrolled through the files, seeing the timestamps lined up with the night of the dinner. There was Diane, unmistakably standing in the kitchen, her movements deliberate as she poured pills from a small bottle and stirred them into a single glass. I watched myself walk in, oblivious, picking up the drinks and carrying them out. Then Gerald accepting the glass that Diane had tampered with. It was all there as plain as day. But the footage didn't stop at the dinner. There were hours more, captured in harsh grayscale. After we'd left, Diane and Gerald exploded into an argument in their kitchen. Diane shrieking at Gerald, her voice jagged with fury. "You drank from the wrong glass. How could you be so stupid?" Gerald barked back, "This isn't the first time you pulled something like this." The rawness of their exchange made my skin crawl. I watched the videos 3 times, each pass stripping away another layer of denial. It wasn't just evidence. It was a window into a toxic pattern, one that Gerald was fully aware of and complicit in, even as he played the victim. The next clip was from 2 days after dinner. Gerald and Diane were arguing about me, their voices low but vicious. "He knows what you did," Gerald said, pacing in front of the fireplace. Diane shrugged, unbothered. "So what? It's his word against mine. Haley's never going to choose him over us. And if she does, she's not the daughter I raised." Diane's smile was thin, almost triumphant. "Don't worry. I've already started talking to her about their marriage problems, planting seeds. By the time I'm done, she'll be filing for divorce and thinking it was her own idea. I slammed my laptop shut, hands trembling. It hit me with full force. This wasn't just about a single dinner, or even about me. This was about control, about shaping Haley's reality from the inside out. They'd been doing this for years, methodically isolating her from anyone who threatened their influence. I called Vanessa without thinking. "Why did you send this to me?" My voice shook with a mixture of gratitude and outrage. She sounded exhausted, her words heavy with old pain. "Because they did the same thing to me when I married Owen. 2 years of it. Constant little games, hints that I wasn't good enough, that I'd never really belong. They tried everything to break us up, and it almost worked. Why didn't you tell us?" I pressed. Vanessa sighed. "Owen doesn't know. He idolizes his father, believes everything he says. I tried to bring it up, but he just thought I was being paranoid, or that I didn't fit in. I couldn't watch them do it again, not to you, not to Haley." The next morning, as I was trying to piece together what to do next, Gerald texted me. "We should talk. Man to man. No wives." The message was both threatening and oddly formal, as if he wanted to remind me who held the power. I met him at the country club, where the walls gleamed with old money and the air was thick with entitlement. He was already seated in a private room, sipping bourbon, the picture of composed authority. "Julian," he said, his tone almost fatherly. "Families are complicated. My wife, she can be difficult, protective, but her heart is in the right place. Drugging someone is her way of showing she cares." I shot back, unable to keep the disgust from my voice. He waved a hand dismissively, as if I was being childish. "It was a misunderstanding. Diane takes anxiety meds. She probably mixed up the glasses. These things happen." "I have the security footage, Gerald," I said, voice low. His face changed instantly, all pretense of warmth evaporating. His eyes went hard, cold. "What do you want, Julian? Money? Is that what this is about? I always suspected you were after Haley's inheritance." "I want you to stop," I said, meeting his gaze. "Stop undermining our marriage. Stop trying to poison Haley against me. Just leave us alone." He leaned forward, lips curling into a thin smile. "You think you're special? That you're the first? We've seen men like you before. People who think they can take advantage of our family. Haley always comes home. Ask her about Thomas. Ask her about the fiancé before you." A chill settled in my bones. "Who's Thomas?" He chuckled darkly. "Haley was engaged before you. A doctor, good credentials. But his family wasn't up to our standards. Took us 6 months, but she broke it off. Came home crying to Daddy. History repeats. Son, you'll see." On my way home, I called Bethany, Haley's old roommate, and asked her about Thomas. There was a long silence. "Oh, God," she finally said, voice tight. "That was brutal. He was the best thing that ever happened to her, but her parents hated him. They convinced her he was cheating. Fake texts, staged photos. By the time Thomas tried to explain, Haley didn't trust him anymore. She cut everyone off. Everything snapped into focus. This wasn't about me. It was a pattern of control, a campaign of sabotage that had been playing out for years. Anyone who tried to help Haley break free was pushed out, isolated, erased from her life as if they'd never existed. I didn't confront Haley right away. Instead, I started gathering evidence, emails, messages, anything that traced a labyrinth of manipulation. I tracked down Thomas, who was wary at first, but after I explained, he forwarded me old emails and screenshots that proved her parents had orchestrated their breakup. I reached out to other ex-boyfriends, friends of Haley's who'd vanished from her life without explanation. The stories echoed each other. Whispered doubts, manufactured drama, relationship sabotage until there was nothing left. Vanessa kept sending me more footage. Clips of Diane and Gerald in their kitchen, plotting in plain sight. "Once they divorce, we'll convince her to move back home," Gerald said in one video. "She can run the family foundation. Meet the right kind of men." The certainty in his voice was chilling. It was as if Haley was a pawn to be moved, not a person to be loved. I compiled everything onto a single drive. It felt like holding a bomb. I invited Owen and Vanessa over for dinner, not telling Haley what was coming. The whole evening I could barely eat, knowing what I was about to unleash. Over dessert, I hooked my laptop to the TV. "There's something you both need to see," I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. For the next hour, we watched the footage together. Silent witnesses to years of calculated destruction. Every video, every email, every whispered plot revealed the truth. This wasn't about love or protection. It was about power and the lengths some people would go to keep it. I knew that nothing would ever be the same after this. But for the first time, I believed that the truth could finally set Haley free. Haley just sat there, frozen, hands clenched in her lap, face drained of all color. Her breathing was shallow, eyes wide and fixed on the television where the last video flickered to a stop. She looked less like herself and more like a shadow, someone hollowed out by a truth too heavy to bear. Next to her, Owen kept shaking his head, his voice a rasp, repeating, "That's not my parents. That's not them," over and over, as if by sheer we could rewrite what we'd all just seen. I could see the tremble in his hands, his world crumbling, his certainty evaporating in real time. When the screen went black, the silence in the room was suffocating. Haley finally turned to me, her face streaked with tears she'd barely noticed. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" she whispered, her voice ragged, desperate, like she was still grasping for some reality in which this wasn't true. I exhaled, feeling the ache of all the months I'd held this alone. "Because you had to see it yourself, Haley. All of it, not just what they did to me, what they've done to you, to Owen, your whole lives. You needed to see the whole picture, even if it shattered everything you thought you knew." Owen surged his feet, his anger a shield against betrayal. "This is bullshit," he spat, glaring at me like I conjured this nightmare. "You edited these videos. My parents, they wouldn't do this. You're trying to turn us against them." His voice cracked on the last word. Vanessa reached for his arm, her touch gentle but unyielding. "They did the same to us. Owen, did you ever wonder why they changed after James was born? Why suddenly I was welcome after years of cold shoulders? A grandchild gave them leverage. They saw a way to keep pulling strings, to keep us close and compliant." Owen stared at her, devastation and disbelief warring on his face. "You never told me." Vanessa's eyes shone with old pain. "I tried. You didn't want to hear it. None of us did. Not really." Later that night, after the others had drifted away, Haley crawled into bed next to me. There was an exhaustion about her that went beyond the physical. It was the exhaustion of someone whose entire foundation had fractured. She lay there quietly, the moonlight catching on her damp cheeks. "I need time to process this," she murmured, barely a sound. "But I believe you now. I'm sorry I ever doubted you." There was more in those words than an apology. There was a kind of surrender, an acceptance that the world she clung to was gone, and what lay ahead was unknown. The next morning, as we sat at the kitchen table, Diane called. Haley put her on speaker, her fingers trembling, but her jaw set. Diane's voice was syrupy sweet, as if nothing had happened. "Darling, I was thinking you should come stay with us for a while. Just you. Your father and I are worried, you know. Marriage can be so hard. Sometimes a little time apart gives clarity." Haley cut her off, her voice unexpectedly steady. "Mom, I've seen the videos." Silence, the kind that speaks volumes. "What videos?" Diane's tone was brittle, forced innocence. Haley didn't hesitate. "The security footage. You drugging Julian's drink. You and Dad plotting to break up my marriage. All of it." There was another pause, longer this time. I pictured Diane, scrambling to regain control, calculating. "Haley, whatever he's shown you has been manipulated. You know, Julian's always had issues with our family. Stop." Haley's voice was low but powerful, and I felt a surge of pride. "We're coming over tonight. All of us. Owen, Vanessa, Julian, and me. We're talking about this as a family. No more secrets. No more lies." After the call, Haley turned to me, her eyes clear, fierce. "They'll deny everything. They'll try to blame you, turn us against each other. I nodded, feeling the weight of the coming confrontation. I know, but this time we're ready. They're not the only ones who know how to play this game. She looked at me, searching my face, and for the first time in weeks, I saw the faintest glimmer of hope. So what's our plan? I smiled, the first real one in ages. We tell the truth, and if they want performance, I'll give them one. I'm not just a guy with a camera. I know how to tell a story. And this time, it's ours. That evening, we arrived at Gerald and Diane's house, me carrying my camera bag, tripod, the works. Owen and Vanessa were already there, sitting stiffly on the edge of the sofa, as if bracing themselves for impact. Gerald greeted us with the practiced calm of a man used to being in charge, his expression unreadable. I understand there's been a misunderstanding, he began, his voice cool, already spinning his narrative. No misunderstanding, I said, setting up the tripod in the middle of the room, making sure everyone could see. I'm documenting this for the family archives. For transparency. Isn't that what you always say, Gerald? Diane bristled, her composure slipping. This is private family business. Exactly, I replied, locking eyes with her. Family business. And I'm family, even if you spent years trying to rewrite that fact. For the next 2 hours, we laid out the evidence. Every manipulated moment, every calculated betrayal. Haley's drink, the lies about Tom, the way every ex-boyfriend had been subtly pushed away, the endless pattern of control that had shaped not just Haley, but Owen, Vanessa, everyone in that room. Each accusation was met with denial, outrage, attempts to gaslight us back into submission. But each time I played a clip, read an email, produced a document. The color drained from Diane's face first, then Gerald's. Their fortress of deception crumbled, brick by brick, as the truth became undeniable. Finally, Haley stood, her voice trembling but strong. I love you. You're my parents. But what you've done is unforgivable. You don't get to control my life anymore. Owen was right behind her, his own voice thick with emotion, but resolute. We're adults. We choose our partners. Our own path. You can't decide for us anymore. Diane started to cry, but it was the tears of someone losing power, not seeking forgiveness. Gerald sat unmoving, staring at the floor as if the defeat was a personal affront. As we gathered our things to leave, I paused in front of Gerald, holding out a USB drive. Everything's on here. Footage, emails, statements. It's yours. He took it, eyeing me warily. What's this supposed to mean? It means I'm not going to ruin your life by exposing this. That would hurt Haley, and I would never do that. But if you ever interfere in our lives again, if you try to manipulate or slander me, everyone gets a copy. Your business partners, your friends, the whole country club. No more secrets. For the first time, Gerald looked at me. Really looked, as if seeing me not as an obstacle, but as someone formidable, someone he could not dismiss. I underestimated you, he said, voice low. Yeah, I replied. You did. 6 months passed. Haley and Owen started therapy, working to the patterns of manipulation and guilt, learning to set boundaries. Vanessa found her own voice, grew stronger too. Diane and Gerald kept their distance, reduced to rare, awkward texts, suddenly respectful of the boundaries they'd never acknowledged before. I saw Haley change, slowly but surely. She laughed more, slept better, even started to dream about things she'd never let herself consider. There was a lightness in our home, a sense of safety that had been missing for so long. Then, just before Christmas, Diane sent a card inviting us to dinner. A fresh start. The invitation read in Diane's looping script, as if she could conjure forgiveness with a phrase. Haley wanted to go. They're still my parents, she said, softer now. And they're trying. Maybe it's not perfect, but it's something. I want to see if it's real. I agree, but I wasn't naive. I knew what people were capable of, how old habits crept back in, how power never let go without a fight. When we arrived, the house looked just as it always had. Immaculate, welcoming. Every detail curated to show a picture of familial bliss. Diane beamed, ushering us in, serving a feast as if food could fill the silence that lingered between us. Gerald was all surface charm, asking about my projects, my work, his tone warm, almost paternal. After dinner, Gerald invited me into his study. The room was lined with books, trophies, reminders of a life built on control and image. He poured 2 glasses of scotch, handing one to me, his eyes searching my face for a reaction. "I have a proposition for you," he said, settling behind his desk. "I've been thinking about your career. Photography's been good to you, but have you considered branching out? I could bring you into my firm, junior partner track. The salary is substantial, the opportunities limitless." I took the glass, but didn't drink, meeting his gaze evenly. "Why?" I asked. "Why now?" He smiled, the practiced, slippery smile of a man who always has an angle. "Your family, and I respect how you handled the unpleasantness. Not many could have stood up to me the way you did. You're resourceful, loyal, qualities I value." I let his words hang in the air, recognizing the offer for what it was. Not an olive branch, but another attempt to control, another test. He wanted me close, manageable, indebted. He wanted to reshape the narrative, to make me his ally, or, at the very least, less of a threat. I set the glass down, untouched. "I appreciate the offer," I said quietly, "but I'm exactly where I want to be. I don't need your approval or your generosity. All I ever wanted was honesty and respect. I hope one day you'll understand what that really means." For a moment, Gerald said nothing. Then he nodded, a trace of something like genuine respect flickering in his eyes. Maybe he realized, finally, that the old rules no longer applied. As I left the study, I felt a sense of closure, not because Gerald or Diane had changed, but because we finally had. We'd rewritten the story on our own terms. And for the first time, I believed that was enough. You stood up for my daughter and didn't back down. That's what a real man does. Gerald's words hung in the air like a challenge. I set my glass down, untouched, feeling the weight of the moment pressing in. "Thanks for the offer, but no," I replied, keeping my voice steady. His smile tightened, lines at the corners of his mouth deepening. "Julian, be reasonable. This is an olive branch, a way forward for us." But I shook my head, more resolute than ever. "No, this is just another way for you to keep your hand on the wheel. You can't buy me, Gerald. And it eats at you that Haley loves me for exactly who I am, not for what I have." For a second, something flickered in his eyes. Then the mask dropped. "Don't be an idiot," he hissed, voice dropping. "Everyone has a price." I pushed my chair back and stood, my pulse pounding in my ears. "That's where you're wrong. That's why you'll never really know your daughter. You've spent so long trying to control her life. You never bothered to see who she's become." I didn't wait for a reply. He'd heard what he needed to hear. Back in the dining room, Diane was showing Haley the old photo albums, her voice soft and nostalgic. "Look at these, sweetheart," she said, her finger tracing a faded photograph. "You were so happy living at home." I caught Haley's eye from across the room, and she read the answer in my expression. She stood up, drawing a deep breath, her hand finding mine. "Mom, Dad," she said, her voice clear and unwavering, "I have something to tell you." The room fell quiet. "We're having a baby. Julian and I. I'm 3 months along." It was like time stopped for a moment. Diane's face crumpled first. Then she rushed forward, hugging Haley tightly, a few tears slipping down her cheek. Gerald stood motionless, his gaze darting between us. Gears turned behind his eyes. "Congratulations," he managed stiffly, his words sounding rehearsed, devoid of warmth. "Thank you," I said, meeting his gaze evenly. Then quietly, so only he could hear, "This baby isn't a pawn in your games." "That's a promise." His face hardened, but he gave a curt nod. He understood, even if he didn't like it. On the drive home, the car was silent except for the hum of the tires on the highway. Haley squeezed my hand until our knuckles were white. "They'll never change, will they?" Her voice was soft, but there was no trace of regret in it. "No," I said, glancing at her, "but they'll have to live with the fact that we have." For the first time, I felt the truth of it, how we'd built something together that didn't depend on them, their approval, or their money. 3 weeks later, a certified letter arrived from Gerald's lawyer. For a second, dread crept in, but when I opened it, I found the deed to our house, the one we'd been renting since moving to Asheville, transferred into our names, along with the legal documents for a trust fund for our unborn child. No note, no conditions, just the assets, clean and final. It wasn't an apology. Gerald didn't do apologies. But it was as close as he could come to admitting that we'd stood our ground, and he'd had to respect it. I realized then that sometimes, for people like him, action spoke louder than any words ever could. Eliza was born in the heat of summer, her tiny hands curling instinctively around my finger, her cries fierce and alive. We named her after my grandmother, a woman who'd known her own share of hard choices. When Diane and Gerald visited the hospital, they brought with them a mountain of gifts, soft blankets, silver rattles, the kind of expensive toys that would sit on a shelf more than see use. But they kept their distance, careful not to overstep. They cooed at Eliza, posed for a few photos, and left without advice or admonition, as if they'd finally realized that offering approval was no longer a requirement for being part of our lives. Time moved on, and our small family found its rhythm. Things with Diane and Gerald settled into a new kind of normal, polite, sometimes awkward, but no longer intrusive. They stopped trying to micromanage Haley's choices or interfere in my career. We got space, and with it, a kind of peace. One evening, after putting Eliza to bed, I was editing photos in my studio when Haley walked in, cradling her phone. "My mom called," she said, her voice thoughtful. "She wants us to come for Christmas." I turned in my chair, searching her face for clues. "What do you think?" She hesitated, then said, "I think we should go, but on our terms. We stay at a hotel, leave when we want, and no one-on-one time with Eliza unless we both agree." I smiled at her resolve. "That works for me," I said. She sat down beside me, Eliza now asleep in her arms. "You know," she said quietly, "I used to think that success meant making my parents proud, living up to their expectations. But I'm starting to realize it's about something else. It's about showing up for the people you love and making choices that you can stand by, even when it's hard." A couple of weeks before Christmas, another envelope arrived from Gerald, this one thick and glossy, his company's annual report. My photographs filled its pages, sunrises over Blue Ridge, portraits of workers, cityscapes at dusk. Work I'd done with no interference, on my own terms. Tucked inside was a short note, written in Gerald's bold hand. "Hired the best photographer I know. Thought you'd want a copy." Gee, it wasn't an apology, and it wasn't gratitude. It was something harder to define. Maybe it was respect, or at least an acknowledgement that I'd earned my place, not through compromise but through conviction. That spring, I opened my own gallery in downtown Asheville, the culmination of years of late nights, freelance gigs, and quiet faith in my vision. On opening night, the space was alive with friends, clients, my parents flown in from Oregon, and Haley by my side, Eliza perched on her hip, wide-eyed and curious. The walls were lined with images that told my story, the one I'd chosen, not the one anyone else had written for me. Near the end of the evening, Gerald and Diane arrived. They didn't stay long, but Diane held Eliza while Haley watched, and Gerald shook my hand, glancing around the gallery. He nodded, and this time I saw something genuine in his eyes. He didn't offer advice or critiques. He simply accepted that this was my world now. When the last guest had left and the doors were locked, Haley asked, "Do you think they've changed?" I thought about it, the question echoing in the quiet. "No," I said finally, "but they know they can't change us, and sometimes that's enough." She smiled, leaning her head against my shoulder, and in that moment I understood that the real victory wasn't in forcing them to accept us, but in knowing we didn't need their acceptance to be whole. Later, sitting with Haley on our porch, the mountains fading into the blue hush of night, Eliza asleep upstairs, the truth settled over me like the softest blanket. I had won by outmaneuvering Gerald and Diane, or by playing by their rules. I'd won by refusing to play at all, by building a life with Haley on our own terms, imperfect and messy but ours. In the end, that was what mattered, standing by each other, choosing love over approval, and finding peace in the boundaries we'd finally learned to draw. I never wavered from my beliefs. I held firm to my principles and stood up for what truly mattered to me. Instead of manipulating situations or trying to outmaneuver others, I chose a path rooted in honesty and unwavering persistence. It wasn't always easy. There were times when patience felt more like a burden than a virtue, and when the world seemed to reward shortcuts and cunning over integrity. But I resisted the temptation to compromise who I was for quick wins or fleeting approval. As I look back, I realize that the real victory comes not from besting others or holding grudges, but from building a life that reflects my true self. I've shaped my days according to my own values, creating a space where I can be authentic and at peace. There's a deep satisfaction in knowing that my choices were guided by sincerity and resilience, rather than pretense or manipulation. The relationships I've nurtured are genuine, filled with people who accept and support me for who I am. In the end, the most meaningful form of payback isn't about proving others wrong or seeking revenge. It's about thriving on my own terms, surrounded by love and contentment, and finding fulfillment in a life well lived.